Now I'm going to do a more formal, because it's me doing it, it'll be a less formal introduction of Dr. Clements, who is Assistant Professor of Psychology here at the university, and then also one of our core faculty at the Shaw Center for Children and Families, and holds the Flaherty Chair. So we have been so excited to add Caitlin to our crew. She's been with us, you're wrapping up your third year now, right? So she's been with us. She studies autism. She has the brain lab, which Elle helps her run. Her current research is, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but that's working with young children to try to understand how, what motivates young children across the neurodiverse spectrum. So that's her current lab. But I have been super impressed with Caitlin and her approach to research, because I think a lot of you are familiar with what kind of a slog the tenure track can be when you're trying to get to, tenure, where you're, doing your course preps and you're trying to get your lab running and you're trying to get those publications out and get new grants, et cetera. But on top of that, Caitlin is doing clinical work so that she will be a licensed clinician here soon. On top of all that, in addition to all of her work, she works really hard to be thoughtfully engaged with the community by hosting a community advisory board of folks who are on the spectrum, as well as people who care for folks on the spectrum, and they give her advice on where she should go with her research. In addition to that, for her specific for her lab, she has also engaged thoughtfully with the community about what the needs are in the community around autism. So working with various providers, and discovered that one of the needs in the community is diagnosis for autism, so that people can get into services as early as possible. And so she has developed an autism evaluation clinic for young children who do not have insurance. And so it's a low cost evaluation, so that those children can get the diagnosis if they need it and get into services. And then she also does all kinds of community outreach stuff so that people on the spectrum can have like their regular old childhood experiences, but in a way that's more comfortable for them. So to have sensory friendly movie nights, sensory friendly touch-a-truck events. So these are the types of things that she's done. So I'm just super proud to have her as part of the Shaw Center for Children and Families, and to work alongside her. And I'm happy that she was willing to be here today with our Inclusion and Belonging Committee and share some of her wisdom. And I'll ask, do you share like scare statistics in this month? If not, I'm gonna say my scares.
Go for it.
Okay, so I'm gonna mangle this. So if I was like an influencer, I would be like, here's the real statistic here, and Adam will put it in the video later. So I'm just gonna say one that I made up, and then you can just like use AI to morph over my voice or whatever. But so she's also done another community engaged thing that she's done is like help to get more people trained in the community on autism evaluation stuff. So it's awesome. But one of her collaborations is with St. Mary's College. And I had gone to some training there several years ago, learning about trying to help adults with an autism diagnosis be successful in the workplace. And one of the numbers that I heard there, where I'm going to mangle and Adam will have to insert later, is that that adults on the spectrum are like 3 times more likely to be unemployed in adulthood than other people with developmental disabilities, like those with Down syndrome. Even though we all know that there's just if you have a diagnosis of autism spectrum, does not mean that you are not, super smart and super capable of all kinds of stuff, but for whatever reason are not able to be employed. And my approach to the world is usually like, couldn't we all just figure out how to get along and to work with folks who have, maybe have some sensory issues, or maybe, need some more processing time when we speak the words, or clearer instructions? Like we can adapt and make this world a friendlier place for folks on the spectrum to work. And so that is why I was super excited that Caitlin has this talk and is willing to share with us so that we might be able to have, make this a more welcoming place for our colleagues on the spectrum. So thank you for welcoming Caitlin.
Thank you so much for having me. That was a very lovely introduction. Thank you, thank you. Much too generous. I'm delighted to be here and to have the opportunity to talk about this topic, which is one of my favorites. So thank you all for being here. I wanted to check in. We have some folks on Zoom. Is that right? Okay. I want to make sure that they can hear me okay.
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. And then Adam, would you be, or if not, maybe Elle could jump in and monitor the chat in case folks on Zoom have questions?
I have the chat up right now.
Awesome, thank you. So if anybody prefers like written over oral and visual, please feel free to pop onto that tiny URL or scan the QR code and you can get the slides and they'll be available forever. Let's see, there it is a little bit bigger. Jen gave me a super lovely introduction. So I use she, her pronouns, and most importantly for this talk, I'm not autistic. So the workshop or this talk strives to center autistic voices. And also if any of you have lived experience, I encourage you to share that. I kind of view this workshop, which like I like getting the information out there, but I don't really feel like I'm the best person to give it. So I kind of view it as I try to pull together a lot of information and then I'm more just the conduit to distribute it. So some of the slides are text heavy and have links. Please feel free to click on those and listen to those folks more than me. Okay, so a note about trying to make this meeting accessible for folks. All communication styles are welcome and accommodated. I didn't send materials ahead of time, I'm sorry, but you can access the slides anytime. And please feel free to take breaks as you need. If you have questions that you want to ask, but you prefer to do it one-on-one, feel free to email me or catch me after. And there might be some activities where I ask you to reflect on something and maybe share with a neighbor, and feel free to opt out of those. All right, so here's where we're going today. First, we'll talk a little bit about neurodiversity in general, and then autism in adulthood, and then move more into autism in the workforce. And I'm fine being interrupted if you have questions. Neurodiversity. Okay, so first, think about a coworker that you admire. What are some of the ways that they work differently from you? I want to make sure we have enough time, so just reflect on this for 1 or 2 minutes, and then I'll ask for an example. Would anyone like to share how a coworker they admire might work differently? I mean,
we worked with a temporary employee who comes to work with us every summer, who she is very open with us about contact and needing space. So she oftentimes, if we have like a large meeting or something, she has to opt out because there's too many people. So we help to make sure that she feels comfortable and gets the information that she needs.
Got it. Okay. So different preference on like how many people are in the room, tolerating the different noise and different stimulants. That. Thank you so much for sharing. So the point of that short reflection is to get us thinking about the diversity in work styles, that there's not a one size fits all. Also diversity in thinking styles, diversity in processing styles. And these are all fall under the umbrella of neurological diversity. So Judy Singer is a woman from Australia who got her PhD in sociology in 1999, and she her mother was on the spectrum, and then her daughter was what we would now consider profoundly autistic. And she wrote her dissertation on the insights that she gleaned off of the 1990s equivalent of Reddit boards for autistic people. And her dissertation was where the term neurodiversity comes from. So this is the quote. Well, yes. So this is the quote. The neurologically different represent a new addition to the familiar political categories of class, gender, race, and will augment the insights of the social model of disability. Even our most taken for granted assumptions that we all more or less see, feel, touch, hear, smell, and sort information in more or less the same way, unless we're visibly disabled, are being dissolved. And so she called this neurological diversity in how we see, feel, touch, hear, smell, and sort information. And that eventually was shortened to neurodiversity.
So it's really hard to see the slides on here. Can you share them with me so I can
Yes.
put them?
Does that tiny URL work for you?
It should.
Let me go back to that. tinyurl.com/26-autistic adults. And hopefully you can get that and then share your screens. Thank you, Anna.
Okay.
John Elder Robeson is another autistic adult who wrote two books that I really recommend, Look Me in the Eyes and Raising Cubby, his autistic son. He says about neurodiversity, it's the idea that neurological differences like autism and ADHD are the result of normal, natural variation in the human genome. This represents a new and fundamentally different way of looking at conditions that were traditionally pathologized. And he went on to say, to many neurodiversity proponents, talk of the cure for autism feels like an attack on their very being. They detest those words for the same reason other groups detest talk of curing gayness or passing for white. And they perceive the accommodation of neurological differences as a similarly charged civil rights issue. Their diversity is part of their makeup. They believe it's their right to be accepted and supported as is. They shouldn't be made into something else, especially against their will, to fit some imagined societal idea. There is controversy about the neurodiversity movement, which he starts to get into a little bit in the second part of this as well. Because neurological differences can disable you, and we'll talk about the social model of disability in a minute. And if you're wondering, okay, well, is neurodiversity just autism? Is it other things? It's a lot of different things. And from neurodiversity, we have the term neurodivergent, which means your neurotype diverges from the average, like all of the conditions that were just under the umbrella. Neurotypical would be a word used to describe a person who learns, communicates, and processes in an average way, and society tends to be set up for neurotypical people. And then neurotype is how one's brain learns, communicates, develops, and processes information. And then autistic culture is a term that's been coined to describe how autistic brains work. Words like stims, autistic flow, autistic burnout, and masking are some common cultural experiences. So neurodivergence can also be a disability, because when we think about disability, well, the reason we think about autism as a disability more than a disorder is that disability reflects the fact that with autism, it's not that there's something wrong or bad about this person. It's really about the interaction between the person and their environment. So the disability means there's an interaction between a non-standard individual and an unaccommodating environment. But if you put in accommodations like a wheelchair ramp, then people who are not the average can access the services that are available to the rest of us. So consistent with this stance, many neurodiversity proponents do view autism as a disability, even if they don't view it as a disorder. So it has been argued before that autistic people lack empathy or the ability to understand the mental states of neurotypical people, which leads to communication breakdowns. There is some growing evidence, which I love to talk about, that autistic people actually communicate just as effectively in autistic communities as neurotypical people do in neurotypical communities. And it's this interaction when it's an autistic person and a neurotypical person trying to communicate that we start having communication breakdowns. So it's not that autistic people can't communicate well, it's that they communicate quite well with each other and their norms, and neurotypical people communicate quite well with each other and their norms. And the seminal study on this was simply a game of telephone where they had 3 lines, a line of all neurotypical, all autistic, and then neurotypical, autistic. And the first 2 lines got the same number of details in the story at the end. And then the 3rd line was just a mess because people really struggled to accommodate communication styles that were not their own. And it's both ways. It's a double empathy problem, not just one way. Okay, so now we'll talk a little bit about what autism looks like in adulthood. So we diagnose autism using the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. We're on the 5th edition text revision right now. And these are the specific criteria that I use to train students and folks in my clinic to think about what these might look like in adulthood. We're gonna watch a video. There we go. We're going to watch a video from Sarah describing her experience of autism in adulthood. Maybe
focused on children living on the spectrum and on support for families, important issues. But those children grow into adults, and there are still don't know what day-to-day life is like for a non-autistic person because that's all I know. But I will get up in the morning, usually tired because this is a huge issue for people with autism or autistic people. I get checked out on it. Is it lack of sleep? Why is it hard to sleep? It's just disordered sleep. I didn't sleep through the night for the first 3.5 years of my life, and I'm still working on getting that up into double digits now. And then from then on, it's managing sensory issues, dealing with executive function disorder because I can't necessarily manage my day the way a neurotypical or non-autistic person would. And then trying to navigate social issues. I have a great network of family and friends. I love them dearly. I don't necessarily always have the energy to put my end of the deal as much as I want to. What would your end of the deal be? Just in terms of something as simple as knowing how to hold up a reciprocal conversation, to being able to be in a group in public and keep up the energy the whole time, even though I love to care people and I like hanging out with people, it just tends to take a lot out of me and drains a lot of energy.
And are you always aware of perhaps how other people might be viewing you, that double track of going?
Yes, it's like a constant awareness, and I'd like to think that over 36 years of studying it, I have sort of a good idea of what people's responses are, but I also have years of bullying, years of being told that I'm not normal or not likable. So there's also a constant panic of, is the feedback I'm getting actually real? Am I too much for someone? Am I being weird for someone? Am I doing something unacceptable that I don't even understand?
And do you rely then on other people to give you that feedback?
Yes, and of course in our society it's just way too polite, so they want to give you sort of subtle feedback, which is not necessarily a way my neurology responds to. I would need more than
a direct response.
Yes.
A direct and frank.
Yes. And then when we get that back in return, we're being cold or callous.
It must be very tricky in a culture like Canadian culture where it's all about no one ever wants to directly say something.
Absolutely. I've spent years navigating just the celebrity gossip message boards because I figured that was the one place you could find unfiltered opinions about what people do. I think it ruined my life to a certain extent, but I also got a lot of feedback on what people actually want to see in other people.
Part of our discussion today is going to be what happens after you age out of high school.
Yes.
So, we've talked to the premier on this program. We've talked to the head of Autism Canada about the supports that are there for parents, for families, and
I'm just gonna
for
skip
autism
that ahead
that
a little bit.
are up and live. You have to find and hold down a job.
Which only about 16% of us do.
Right, in this age category. So then what needs to be done? What do you need to see as adults in order to maintain support so that you can contribute?
It's a lot more than we're going to be able to cover in like one interview question, because we're so fond of saying, one person, one autistic person, one autistic person. And any services that we're going to have for adults are going to need to be a spectrum of services, for lack of a better term. So we're going to need to see everything from one-on-one care for adults with higher needs to something as simple as not just awareness, but acceptance of what things look like. If an autistic adult can stim in public, do repetitive hand motions or something without necessarily being judged or even put in danger because those movements might look like some heat issue and then they would get targeted, that energy can be channeled into something more meaningful for them. So it's basically everything from just accepting people as they are to having the funds to help them deal with their lives.
Great conversation this morning, Sarah. Thank you so much.
Okay, so hopefully you are getting a sense of autism in adulthood from Sarah. To put it down into some written words, autism in adulthood some parts might sound familiar, things that you've heard about autism in childhood, and others are a little different. So avoiding eye contact, emphasis on routines, monologuing a lot about your favorite topic, and if cues are subtle, as Sarah said, that can be hard to pick up on. Nervous talking, violating social norms, meltdowns, and burnout are some of the things that people highlight as really challenging in adulthood. And you might have heard that folks with autism don't make eye contact or have flat facial expressions. In adulthood, and sometimes in childhood too, sometimes it can present as super intense eye contact or exaggerated facial expressions or exaggerated tone. Really, the full spectrum of different types of social interactions can be present in folks on the spectrum on any different dimension. And in women, a historically overlooked group when we think about autism, they tend to be diagnosed late in life, often when demands exceed their capacity. So middle school is a time of increased diagnosis for women because you were kind of getting along in elementary school, but now there's cliques and gossip and there's all these different things going on and it's just all going way over your head. And so we're finally starting to see the impairment that might have been there all along, but your environment was more matched in elementary school. We see the same thing when kids get to college or when adults start their first job, that now we see that disability, the mismatch between the non-standard person and the environment. And that might be when you get your autism diagnosis, especially for women. Anxiety, depression, and burnout from masking. Are folks familiar with masking? Kind of covering up your autistic symptoms, imitating people around you. And women tend to be particularly good at this, autistic women, figuring out what other people are doing around them and then doing that. So it's more of a scripted, learned social interactions so that they can fit in and appear neurotypical. Let's see. And sort of how Sarah was describing, I love that she said, I love hanging out with people and I love these relationships with my friends and my family. I love them dearly, but it's just hard for me to keep up my end of the bargain and I get so drained by going to a party. So just because you're autistic doesn't mean you don't like those things. It might just be really hard for you. Masking and of course, stims. Are people familiar with stims? So stims are often used as ways to cope or self-regulate, but like Sarah was saying, they can make you stand out in a way that you might not want to in a public setting. And so you're suppressing your stims, and then when you're alone, your stims come out and it might help you regulate. So let's talk about the idea of a spectrum of autism. If we think about the autism spectrum like this, it's hard to know what's on one end and what's on the other end, especially because I just talked about how some people might have very little eye contact and other people might have a lot of eye contact. So where does eye contact go on the spectrum if one side is not necessarily more autistic than the other? So an autistic woman reconceptualized the spectrum as more of a circle with all of these different features of autism. So anxiety, abnormal or atypical posture, eye contact, fidgets, fixations, abnormal or flat speech, noise sensitivity. And I'll just read what her comments were. I've been labeled as high functioning. I've been stuck on the far right end of a linear spectrum by professionals and government agencies my whole life. I present very neurotypically at appointments and interviews, so much so that I've been denied services that I desperately need. I struggle in so many areas. My current mental state right now proves that more than ever. I'm suffering from a lot of burnout because I try to live up to this label of high functioning. And she goes on. These graphics are so important because they empower autistic people who are considered high functioning and low functioning. These terms have been re-established as high support needs and low support needs to put the emphasis more on society, that it's not the person's functioning level, but the support that they need from their environment. So she continues, I think we often base our functioning levels on whether you're verbal or not, but there are people who can't communicate in a traditional way that do things like go to college, which I don't have the capacity to do. People who are considered lower functioning can achieve things I could only dream of. By labeling us on a straight line, it hurts people who can't live up to their label and dismisses the talents and skills of those who are considered lower functioning.
I want to do color wheels now. We could all color in. Whatever.
What our own profile? Yeah.
What was the word that you used again? Just a
Support needs.
support needs. So
Yeah.
high support and low support is how we
Or moderate or substantial. You can put any descriptor you want in front of it, and in different domains. Like maybe someone might be very high support needs with regard to executive functioning, but low support needs with regard to communication.
okay, so it's branch out different.
Mhm.
What support they need.
Exactly. Thanks, Erin. And one last note on autism and adulthood. We see a lot of intersectionality between minoritized sexual and gender identities and autism. So 20% around of autistic individuals, or this is the other way around, I'm sorry, about 20% of gender diverse people identify as autistic. And here are some quotes from someone on the spectrum. I can't tell if I'm asexual or just have a lot of anxiety, sensory and control issues around sex. So just wanted to highlight the intersectionality between these two minoritized identities. Questions about autism in adulthood before we talk about autism in the workforce?
I think just an observation. So Spectrum, the LGBTQIA plus ERG, and then Profound, the neurodiversity and parent supporters ERGs are actually doing a collaboration together on self-advocacy in the workplace.
Nice.
And like I said this as like a little tee-hee joke. I was like, oh yeah, when you look at like queer people and neurodivergent, like if that's a Venn diagram, it's much closer to a circle. So I said that because I saw it on the internet and I thought it was funny and applicable, but knowing that there's like hard facts behind
Yes,
that,
you're
it's
onto something.
pretty validating.
Okay.
No.
So before we get into autistic adults in the workforce, I thought we would touch on autistic adults in higher ed for a brief moment. Just to highlight that, especially if you have student workers here in your workplace, autistic college students are often struggling with their own unique set of challenges. A lot of stigma associated with the diagnosis. Increased rates of loneliness, anxiety, and depression are associated with autism, as well as isolation and housing and roommate concerns come up quite a bit. And they tend to outperform their peers academically, but express less satisfaction overall in their college experience. This ASAN, the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network, has this amazing free Navigating College PDF on their website that talks about self-advocacy and all types of aspects of the college experience. So I would recommend that as a resource if you know anyone who might benefit. Okay, so let's start the autism in the workplace conversation with a scenario. So you have a meeting and then a close coworker vents to you after. Gosh, what's Valerie's deal? She doesn't pay attention. She's always knitting during meetings. Then she randomly proposed we change the calendar system and was really aggressive about it. We've done it that way forever. She hasn't even been here that long. She's never in the lounge. She's always wearing headphones, so I hardly even know her. even though she's been here 6 months, gosh, I need another cup of coffee. What types of neurodivergent behavior might you notice here?
The knitting might be like a kind of stem.
Socially acceptable, the kind of stem she's come upon that she can do in a meeting.
And clearly some sensory with wearing the headphones.
Yep, controlling her sensory overwhelm.
And if she's never in the lounge, she probably is not, has some of that closeness. Like doesn't need to be around a lot of people.
Yeah.
Overstimulates her.
Chit chat might not be her shtick.
She has to do something like before order, a certain order.
Yeah. She might have like a certain, like a need for, sameness that she would like in the calendar system to make it work better for her.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
The aggressiveness could just be that she's blunt.
Yes. Yeah. She aggressive or is she blunt and direct? And that's not this person, your coworker's, preferred communication style.
That's exactly what I was gonna say.
Thank you, Adam.
Also wonder about though, she doesn't pay attention, and I'm wondering if it's maybe she doesn't give the visual cues that you expect for someone paying attention.
Yep. Maybe she's not making eye contact, which neurotypical society sees as an important sign of attention. I think you got all of those. The other one to note is that this coworker doesn't know Valerie well, which could be for a number of reasons. Okay. I would like you, if you have a piece of paper, jot down some things. What might you say or do in this situation with this coworker? And then will you give feedback to Valerie? So reflect on that for a second. And then if you're comfortable, I'll ask you to chat with the person next to you about it, if you're going to give feedback to Valerie. So let's take 1 minute to jot some things down. And then we'll chat.
And Valerie is a peer, she's not a supervisor.
Yep,
Okay.
here.
No, I'm not gonna get that.
All right, take about 10 more seconds to wrap up your thoughts. Folks on Zoom, if you could drop some of your thoughts in the chat about what you might say or do, and then if you'll give feedback to Valerie. That'd be great for the Zoom chat. Okay, folks in the room, if you could pair up, I think we should maybe do Allison, Adam, and was it Beth? Deb, I'm sorry, Deb. Maybe the three of you could be a group, and then I think maybe the three of you over here, and besides that, we can do pairs.
Wow. Well, I feel like I'm so
I am Valerie.
Yeah. What was your initial response? I thought so, yeah, my initial response.
I would be. And then I would go back to why are they doing this? Like I think in me, I would pray, because I wish to assign the person that's coming to and kind of address the meeting, like that's something I'm paying attention, but this. And then I kind of see myself focused, but that's also influenced by the fact that for my boss, the other city has Valerie. Also, I would tell and then really start to find out the people we have that from different ways. And if you have a legitimate concern, maybe you should talk to Valerie and not.
Yeah, it's like every talk about it, but it's not to like.
Yeah.
Change anything. It's like,
Correct.
hey, like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think your point of view is like, how's it going?
Yeah.
And be like, you know, use that.
Just because she's thinking the way you think doesn't mean she's.
Maybe bring up some insights where it's like, hey, like, I saw that.
Just think I could sit.
So the other person hasn't spoken yet, please switch.
I don't know, like, pen, I give you a piece of paper. You wanna say?
Yeah, I might make word money.
Fair
That's
enough.
okay. Thank you. Yes, yes.
Then I suggested maybe telling her that she thought she needs. And then I suggested talking to the coworker. Because she's not paying attention to the same way you pay attention, because she's hard. A little bit like the parent.
So you can just.
We should.
Kind of get people's nerves.
Yeah.
That like.
Having something to do.
And very. They only have like.
Wrap up your conversations.
I think working from.
Yeah. Try to make this the night and like resonate with
It's like, so I just feel like.
But I don't think it's really like similar, that is. I know that there's some. It's like, is it autism, or are they just like, yeah,
I feel like.
no, I actually appreciate the plan, I'm not saying it. That's. To me, that's exactly from going there.
Can I ask everyone to come back to the conversation? Thank you. Okay, we'll go in the room and then maybe from the chat. So, would someone like to share how you, let's start with what you might say and do when your coworker vents to you. Would someone like to share what your group talked about? How you're gonna respond to the coworker?
I like what Erin had to say, and you were just like, well, I would love to wear headphones too, like. In just normalizing like a lot, like, it's not, these things aren't weird, so.
Yeah. I like that normalization and empathizing. Anything from the chat?
They wrote a couple things, but they're more about.
Feedback to Valerie.
Yeah.
Sure. Do you want to kick us off from the chat about feedback to Valerie?
Sure. Annie, Enval, Annie Enval Witowski said, ask her how she likes to receive information. Is written better or is having a conversation, both? What actions can I take to make our workspace more comfortable so that you feel supported?
I love it. It's like she's reading off some of my future slides. Wonderful. Thank you, Annie. Anyone else have anything different to add? A different approach for feedback to Valerie? Sure.
My standard response in life is giving grace, because you just don't know what others are going through.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I always say you need to give grace, including myself. I'm driving down the street and someone cuts me off, and of course many people are like their instincts to say. Yeah. And you have to remember, you have to say, so give grace, what if that person is going to a loved one's side, at the, you know, the hospital, whatever. So that's because I have a neurodivergent child, I am more sensitive to it, so I would definitely respond to Valerie, there's no doubt. And give grace is where I would start.
I love that. Thank you. Anyone else?
I think I would
Go ahead, Jen.
address that she mentioned something about the calendar, just to warn her, you know, just to say like, we heard you in the meeting, and that this will be more of a group decision, but just so she would know that she was heard in the meeting, but that there may not be a change because it would be a group decision about that.
I love that, following up with her, being honest and direct, but making sure that she knows her input is valued and heard.
We kind of talked about that we would mirror Valerie's communication style so that she would know that, like, we would try to meet her where she was and try to acknowledge her needs in the way that she treats us, we treat her in a positive way.
Absolutely. One last thought, Adam?
Oh, I was just gonna say, like, unfortunately in this scenario, I don't know how well I know Valerie.
Sure.
So that also could, you know, determine how I approach talking to them. And also our coworker, seems to have a caffeine addiction problem. Probably if they help.
That's making some assumptions.
Take care of that over here.
Yeah.
I did include a scary number for
Oh,
you,
yeah,
Jen.
all right.
So 8 million workers in the United States have a disability. And employment is a social determinant of health and well-being. So in our country, employment is how people receive often access to healthcare and employee assistance programs, which directly relate to the quality of their physical health and also their mental health and well-being. And there's also a bi-directional relationship between employment and independent daily living. So on the one hand, employment increases opportunities in which the autistic person can practice the skills that are necessary to live an independent life. And then on the other hand, there's an increase in independent living skills from people who are employed, and it affects their chances of becoming employed. And then the reverse is true in a negative feedback loop. And employment is one of the key factors that predicts quality of life for autistic people. Predictors of poor transition from childhood services into adulthood, where employment would be expected. The poor person environment fit is the top one. Uncertainty about roles of the parents and supports given to the person in the workplace should focus on changing the social and the physical environment rather than the person's behavior. So maybe for the example with Valerie, if a manager or someone in a position of leadership or power could normalize some of her meeting behaviors that aren't interfering with other people's workplace productivity. So like the knitting or the headphones or not being in the lounge. That can go a long way towards improving that person environment fit. The uncertainty about the roles of the parents, I thought I saw some confused looks there. So parents, sometimes they've been in charge of managing their child's IEP and their supports all the way through high school and sometimes even continuing into college. So sometimes it can feel natural for the autistic individual to rely on the parents for assistance in getting the job, and then parents to be fairly involved in the individual's job, which can cause some friction with employers and at the workplace. So creating certainty and expectations for parents and the person's, what's it called, like independence at the workplace can be helpful and be a better predictor or be a predictor of a better transition. More scary statistics. So young autistic adults, 2/3 don't transition after high school into post-secondary education or employment. Some people have an image of an autistic 20-year-old living in their parents' basement playing video games, and that's not too far from the norm for a lot of people. Only about 4 to 11% are competitively employed in young adulthood. What do I mean by employed? For some people, that can be competitively employed. It could also be with the support of a job coach, whether they stay there long-term or get faded out, or in a sheltered or employed or supported employment setting.
Quick question.
Yes.
Do you know if this has shifted at all? Because I'm seeing that these studies are from 2015 at the most recent,
Yes.
especially with like self-identification and also the broader understanding of autism.
Yes, that's a good question. I wasn't able to find good, like large epidemiological studies, at least for the US, of more recently, but I would be so interested to know that as we've become more accepting and destigmatized autism, if that's changed at all. Yeah.
Yeah, remote employment, I think.
Yeah,
That's way
yes.
more common,
That's
that might
true.
also be more accommodating as well. I wonder
Yeah.
if that might improve things.
And have diagnoses increased too since then? Maybe there's more autistic people in the workplace than they thought because they didn't have a diagnosis at the time.
Yes, I think that's definitely true.
Yeah, my question was gonna be kind of a mirror of yours, but from like the therapy standpoint, because I think Michigan, Medicaid has only like approved certain autism therapies for the past like 15, 20 years. And so that's like maybe just now long enough to start seeing, but even then it's like, anyways, like, do you think that is going to have an impact on employment? Like, I know that's a big time gap, but.
Yes, I think all of these kind of epidemiological prevalence and service access questions, especially when you think about self-identification, are sticky and kind of hard to study. I'm hoping, and I think there's there are a few great research groups that are doing work on this, but like even our national prevalence monitoring has historically monitored prevalence in 4-year-olds and 8-year-olds. So those numbers aren't even going to be up to date, like the ones that come out every 2 years. And you probably see the headlines like 1 in 36 children have autism. Well, that's not including adults, where it's going to be higher because people get diagnosed after age 8 now. And it definitely isn't going to include self-diagnosis, because that's from school and hospital records. Yeah, so I'm sorry that I don't have better answers to those.
No, it's a tough,
Great questions.
tough question.
Yeah. For middle-aged autistic adults, 80% are unemployed. And like Jen was saying, it's much worse for autism than for other disabilities. And this statistic just kind of always blows my mind, that having an intellectual disability accompanying your autism actually increases your likelihood of having a structured daytime activity or a job. And I think, and the authors argued, that that's because if you have intellectual disability, you're already accessing societal supports in other domains, maybe like SSI or assistance with housing and such. So you're more likely to have a job coach and have help getting through that interview process. Whereas if you're just autistic, and you're maybe living with your parents and you're not plugged into all our public systems, you're still having to get a job and keep a job on your own. So you're less likely to be able to do that. Does that make sense? So some benefits to society. Autistic unemployment reflects a productivity loss of $38 billion each year. If more autistic people were employed, we would have their tax contributions as well. And it would be a reduction in cost to some of the longer term service programs. And like I was saying before, being employed increases your ability to live independently. So it's really a positive feedback loop of utilizing fewer public services for those who like the economic argument. And there's also benefits to our organizations or departments, the centers where we work. Autistic individuals, we've focused really on the social differences so far in this talk, But there's other differences too that can actually benefit your organization or department. So like higher levels of concentration, reliability, conscientiousness, and persistence, accuracy, close attention to detail, and ability to identify errors, especially in what neurotypical people often perceive as really monotonous or repetitive tasks. Technical abilities such as in IT and often detailed factual knowledge and an excellent memory that could provide nice institutional memory and longevity for projects. And I think we've definitely found that at the Shaw Center, the attention to detail, ability to identify errors in data, which has huge value for us. Autistic individuals are more likely to use their job for behavioral or social interaction problems than for their ability to do the work. So it's really the soft skills that are getting in the way more than their actual ability to do the job. And this is making a lot of organizations miss out on those assets that autistic people, the autistic neurotype brings, because we can't get over the hurdle of the social interaction or the behavioral issues. Okay, how to be a good colleague. And then maybe I'll just show briefly the recruiting and retaining autistic talent, because I know we just have a few minutes left. Okay, so we can do a quick exercise. If everyone will be quiet for about 10 seconds and notice some of the noises or potential distractions in the room. So while we were quiet, I heard a fan, I think it's the HVAC system, kind of buzzing. Did anyone else hear that? Who's been aware of that, like this whole meeting? Okay, so some people have and other people haven't. And you guys, that was a perfect test case. So there are a lot of different sensory inputs, whether it's like the HVAC system or the buzzing of a fluorescent light or like the seams on your socks. Were you pointing to something, Megan?
The brightness of the light.
The brightness of the lights. So we all differ in our ability to tune those out. And when you're not able to tune that out, that's just like a little bit more of your energy, as Sarah called it, that is going into noticing and tuning it out more intentionally, because your neurological system isn't habituating to those external distractors. And that's true of like different scents that might be around, a lot of different things that just are using up your energy. So we say the person on the spectrum is here on the left, where just like the baseline level of being at their desk, they might already be using a lot of their energy just to stay regulated. Whereas the neurotypical person, who's able to habituate to a lot of different noises and inputs, and people around them are communicating with them in their like preferred communication step, they're down there. So they're not quite as overwhelmed, just at their baseline. Okay, now there's an unscheduled meeting and it doesn't have an agenda. Maybe your boss put it on your calendar and you're like, I don't know what this is about. And if that's going to increase everyone's stress level by like this much, the neurotypical person can handle it because they're like base level of regulation. They still have a lot of capacity. The autistic person, that might put them over the top and they might present as really dysregulated or like having a breakdown just because this meeting got put on their calendar. Whereas the neurotypical person is equally stressed, but because their baseline started off lower, it's easier for them to handle that surprise event. Does that make sense? Okay, so just kind of keep that in mind for the next few slides. So when giving instructions to an autistic coworker, what's recommended is clear, concise language, providing sequential timelines, chunking tasks down into small, more manageable pieces, giving time, and someone brought this up at the very beginning of today, giving time for people to process before having them ask questions and making sure you leave space and they're processing at their own pace. And asking, like you all were saying during the last exercise, how they like to be communicated with, oral, written, in person, asynchronous. When providing feedback, if there's something to improve, it's recommended, and I should say in the slides, I put the links to the sources for all these recommendations. So if you want more exhaustive lists, please feel free to go there. So for feedback, lead with honesty, clear, direct, kind, specific, and meaningful feedback. And if your usual feedback techniques aren't working, try being more blunt. It might feel uncomfortable for you, but it might not feel uncomfortable to the person you're communicating with. Speak more plainly, more directly, or try an alternative form. And if you can provide positive feedback, do it. People who are like in a minority processing style or workplace style might be getting a lot of negative feedback, and it can really start to pile on and might lead to those increased rates of anxiety, depression, and burnout. So whenever possible, use labeled praise and do it as soon after the occurrence as possible. And ideally aim for a 4-to-1 ratio of positive and neutral interactions with the person to corrections. And this might mean seeking them out or sending them positive email messages if they're not hanging out in the lounge, for example, just to make sure you are having non-negative, non-corrective points of contact. Workplaces can have a lot of unwritten rules, and making them explicit benefits not only the neurodivergent, but also everyone who will benefit and is more likely to follow all the rules if they're visible and clear. And some things to consider, like sensory sensitivities, the importance of routines. Social inclusion I wanted to highlight. So some people might assume, oh, they're autistic. They probably don't want to come to happy hour. Invite them to social events, like Sarah said that she would want to go. She might decline because it might just be too much. And if they decline repeatedly, you could ask if they still want to be invited, but definitely err on the side of including would be the recommendation. Okay, and I will end on this note, the magic of inclusive design. So if you've been thinking through the last few slides, like, yeah, I would kind of like to receive feedback that way. And I would like a 4-to-1 ratio of positive and neutral to corrective feedback. Yeah, these are generally good practices. And that's the principle of inclusive design. It will probably benefit your autistic coworkers a lot, but it'll benefit everyone. Just like curb cuts benefit not only people in wheelchairs, but also people with strollers, people on bikes, or people who like to skateboard. All right, so I'll end there. And maybe as you walk back to your office, you can reflect on ways your workplace would be more inclusive. Thank you.